Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, into a world lit by firelight and shadowed by uncertainty. A time when your biggest worry wasn't a bad Wi-Fi signal, but, surviving the winter. You probably wouldn't survive, let's be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, just for a moment, that you're breathing air thick with the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint, ever-present aroma of livestock. You feel the rough weave of homespun wool against your skin, a constant, slightly itchy reminder of your place in the world. This isn't the romanticized countryside of oil paintings. This is the gritty, unyielding reality of peasant life. Centuries ago, the sun dictates your day, rising to signal toil and setting to bring a brief, often uneasy, rest. Life isn't a grand adventure. It's a cycle of backbreaking work, the gnawing threat of hunger, and the chilling presence of the unknown. You wake before dawn, your breath misting in the dim light of your small, shared dwelling. The floor is cold, packed earth, and the wind. Ah, the wind. It always seems to find a way through the wattle and daub walls, carrying with it the whispers of the wild, untamed world just beyond your door. In this world, science, as we understand it, simply doesn't exist. There's no germ theory to explain why little Alara down the lane is fading from a fever. No meteorologist to predict the devastating hailstorm that could flatten your meager crop of barley. When illness strikes, it's not bacteria or viruses that are blamed, but perhaps an imbalance of the humors, a punishment from a disgruntled deity, or the malevolent gaze of an envious neighbor. The world operates on a different set of rules that are often invisible and feel entirely arbitrary. Back then, going viral usually meant you had the plague, not a hit TikTok dance. The sheer helplessness in the face of nature's whims and the body's frailties is a constant companion. Consider a mainstream historical fact that underscores this fragility: the Black Death in the mid-14th century. Imagine a third, maybe even half of everyone you know, family, friends, the grumpy miller, the kind woman who sells herbs, just gone, vanished into the terrifying mystery of a disease no one could comprehend, let alone cure. That shadow hangs heavy. So, without the comfort of textbooks or the reassuring glow of a search engine, you rely on what you can know: observation. You watch the way the swallows fly low before rain, the peculiar stillness in the air that precedes a summer storm, the subtle changes in the forest that signal the turning of seasons. This knowledge is ancient, passed down through generations, a tapestry woven from countless small observations. Your grandmother taught your mother. Who taught you? How to read the signs in the sky, in the behavior of animals, in the very feel of the earth beneath your feet. You didn't have a sophisticated weather app predicting down to the minute. You had Old Man Hemlock down the lane, whose left knee would throb 3 days before a hard frost. Surprisingly reliable. Old Man Hemlock, your village's original, very creaky, human barometer, and where observation bumps up against the unexplainable, belief rushes in to fill the void. Why did the milk curdle overnight despite the cool cellar? Why was a perfectly healthy calf born with a twisted leg? Sometimes, the answer wasn't a draft or a fluke of genetics, but something else. This is where you might encounter a quirky, lesser-known tidbit from the annals of folklore: the belief in changelings. If a baby was sickly, cried incessantly, or seemed somehow not right, it wasn't an undiagnosed medical condition. It was whispered that the Fey folk had stolen the true child and left one of their own strange offspring in its place. Such beliefs, while unsettling, offered a form of explanation, a narrative for the inexplicable suffering and strangeness that life could throw at you. This brings us to the core concept we're exploring tonight, superstitions. In this context, weren't just quaint, silly notions. They were deeply serious, profoundly human attempts to impose some kind of order on a world that often felt overwhelmingly chaotic and hostile. They were the original algorithms, the first attempts at pattern recognition in the face of random data. If doing this action seemed to coincide with a positive outcome, or avoiding that action seemed to prevent a negative one, then a rule was born. Historians still argue whether the intense waves of, say, witch phobia that would periodically sweep through communities were driven more by genuine fear of the supernatural, or by the need for scapegoats when life got particularly unbearable, like during famines or plagues. It's likely a complex mix, but the underlying desire for answers, for control, is undeniable. These beliefs, these rituals and taboos, they formed a framework, a way to navigate the treacherous waters of daily existence. Spilling salt might invite bad luck, so you handle it with care. Carrying a certain charm might ward off illness, so you clutch it tightly. Planting by the phases of the moon might ensure a better harvest, so you consult the night sky with an almost religious fervor. It's like an early, very rustic form of cognitive behavioral therapy, or perhaps just a really elaborate placebo effect. If I turn my socks inside out, the blight won't get my cabbages. Spoiler, the blight often still got the cabbages. But for a moment, for a season, the ritual offered a sliver of agency, a sense of participating in your own fate, rather than being merely a passive victim of it. This wasn't about being illogical. It was about survival, both physical and psychological, in a world that offered few other tools for coping. You live by the rhythm of the seasons, the sweat of your brow, and the intricate, often unwritten rules that governed your every interaction with the seen and unseen forces that shaped your harsh, beautiful, terrifying world. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking through streets that feel both familiar and strangely alien. The air, the very essence you draw into your lungs with each breath, isn't just air. Oh no, it's a carrier, a messenger, sometimes a malevolent entity in itself. This is the world before we knew about those tiny invisible culprits we call germs. Here, the primary suspect for what makes you unwell, for that creeping fever or the dreaded cough, is often something far more pervasive, far more atmospheric. We're talking about bad air, or as the more scholarly types would call it, miasma. Imagine you're strolling, perhaps a little too close to the marshlands just outside the city walls. The air here feels different, doesn't it? It's heavy, damp, and carries a particular bouquet of decay, rotting vegetation, stagnant water. You instinctively wrinkle your nose. Today, you might think, swamp gas. Smells awful. And maybe worry vaguely about mosquitoes. But back then, that smell, that palpable thickness in the air, isn't just unpleasant. It's a warning. It's the miasma, seeping from the earth, believed to be pregnant with disease. You'd probably quicken your pace, maybe even hold a perfumed handkerchief to your nose, a small, fragrant shield against the invisible onslaught. It's not just a bad smell, it's bad air. And that distinction is everything. This belief that diseases like cholera or the plague were spread through these noxious atmospheric conditions was incredibly widespread. In fact, miasma theory was a dominant medical theory for centuries, influencing public health and urban planning well into the 19th century. Never Long after, you'd think someone would have figured out the whole microbe thing. Florence Nightingale, bless her, was a staunch believer in miasma, thinking fresh air was the ultimate cure-all, and while fresh air is good, her reasoning was a little off, like thinking a scarecrow keeps crows away because it's fashionable. So, you learn to navigate your world by its smells, by the perceived purity of its breath. Certain places become zones of caution. The butcher's district, with its lingering scent of blood and offal, especially in the summer heat. You might take the long way around. The tanneries. Oh, the tanneries, with their acrid chemical reek and piles of hides. Definitely a place to hold your breath and hurry past. Graveyards, especially newly filled ones, were viewed with deep suspicion. It wasn't just ghosts you were worried about. It was the potential for decaying matter to release its sickly essence into the atmosphere. The very ground in these places was thought to exhale illness. You'd see people planting fragrant herbs like rosemary or rue around their homes, not just for cooking or a pleasant aroma, but as a kind of aromatic barricade. It was a bit like using an air freshener to fight off a zombie apocalypse, charmingly optimistic, if ultimately futile against the real enemy. And it's not just places, but people too. If someone in your community falls ill, their home becomes a focal point of this miasmic dread. The air inside that dwelling is now considered compromised, tainted. You might avoid walking too close to their windows, especially if they're open, if you absolutely have to enter. Perhaps you carry a vinaigrette, a small perforated box containing a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, hoping its sharp scent will cut through and neutralize the bad air. It's a very personal, very olfactory form of social distancing. People who worked in professions deemed smelly or unclean, gravediggers, executioners, sometimes even physicians who spent too much time with the sick, could find themselves subtly or not so subtly shunned, not necessarily because they were bad people, but because they were perceived as walking miasma magnets. Think about it. You're trying to stay healthy, and your main toolkit is your nose and a set of beliefs about what constitutes good versus bad air. It's a sensory-driven system of precaution. When a town decided to pave its streets or improve drainage, the motivation wasn't always about nicer pathways for your ox cart. Often, it was a direct attempt to combat miasma by reducing filth and standing water, those supposed breeding grounds of disease-laden vapors. These actions, born from a misunderstanding, sometimes stumbled into actual public health benefits. Cleaning streets reduces pests and actual sources of bacteria, even if you're doing it because you think the smell of refuse is going to give you consumption. This is where we see that loose connection to proto-hygiene. You're not washing your hands because of germs. You might wash them because they carry the scent of sickness or the residue of a place deemed unhealthy. It's interesting how these ideas lingered. Consider the quirky, lesser-known tidbit that during plague outbreaks, physicians often wore those famous bird-like masks. But the long beak wasn't just for looking terrifyingly cool. Like an ancient steampunk crow, it was stuffed with aromatic herbs, spices, and dried flowers, lavender, mint, camphor, cloves. The idea was that this perfumed barrier would filter out the deadly miasmas before they could be inhaled. They were, in essence, walking, talking air purifiers, relying on the power of pleasant smells to combat the deadliest of airs. Whether it offered any real protection against Yersinia pestis is, shall we say, highly debatable, but it certainly made a statement. And these weren't just vague fears. Elaborate systems were developed. Fumigation was a big deal. If a house had seen sickness, it would be aired out for days, sometimes weeks. Fires burning fragrant woods like juniper or pine would be lit, not just for warmth, but to cleanse the air. clothes and bedding of the sick would be smoked or aggressively aired, sometimes even burned, all in an effort to dispel the lingering miasmatic contamination. You might even find people burning sulfur, a truly potent smell, believing its harshness would drive out the more subtle, sickly airs. It's a bit like trying to scare away a mouse with a foghorn. Overkill, and it makes your whole house smell like a chemistry experiment gone wrong. But the intent is there. The precision with which people tried to manage this invisible threat is fascinating. Some believed miasma was heavier at night, clinging closer to the ground, so sleeping in upper rooms was considered safer. Windows facing away from prevailing winds that might carry effluvia from undesirable areas were preferred. Historians still argue whether the intense focus on smell as a diagnostic tool and a preventative measure significantly hindered or accidentally helped the eventual understanding of contagion. On one hand, it diverted attention from actual transmission vectors for a long time. On the other, the drive to clean up smelly urban environments undoubtedly had some positive, albeit indirect, health consequences. You can almost feel that slight anxiety, can't you? That constant, low-level vigilance about what you're breathing. Every unexplained illness in the neighborhood, every foul odor wafting on the breeze, could be a sign that the delicate balance of the air has been upset. It's a world where your own breath could betray you, not because of what's in your lungs, but because of what your lungs are drawing in from the world outside. So you seal your windows a little tighter at dusk, perhaps murmur a prayer, and hope that tonight, at least, the air stays sweet. You clutch your pomander, a small ball of perfumed wax and spices, and take a deep, hopefully fortifying, sniff. It's not science. Not yet. But it's what you have. It's your best guess in a world full of invisible threats, where keeping the bad air out is your first line of defense. Right. So, you're feeling utterly dreadful. Remember that gnawing ache in your gut we talked about? Or perhaps it's a fever that has you shivering under your thin woolen blanket, even as sweat slicks your brow. Your world has shrunk to the size of this damp, smoky hut, and the dim light filtering through the single shuttered window does little to lift your spirits. What now? You can't just pop a couple of pills and call in sick to your plowing duties. Can you? Oh no, that's not quite how things work around here. Your options are, shall we say, a tad more rustic. You hear a shuffling outside. It's probably Old Mother Elmsworth, or perhaps the village wise woman. Her name whispered with a mixture of respect and a tiny, tiny bit of fear. She's the one everyone turns to when the humors are out of balance, or when a mysterious ailment takes hold. She doesn't have a fancy degree, no white coat, definitely no sterile equipment. What she has is a lifetime of observation, a memory packed with the lore of her mother and her mother's mother, and a rather pungent collection of dried herbs hanging from the rafters of her own small cottage. She enters, and the air immediately changes, thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and something else, something sharp and green. She peers at you, her eyes surprisingly keen in her wrinkled face. She might poke you a bit, ask some pointed questions about what you've eaten, or where you've been. Don't expect a blood pressure cuff or a stethoscope. Her diagnostic tools are her senses, honed by necessity. Now, let's talk about what she brings to the table. Quite literally, this is where the real medicine of your time comes into play, a fascinating, and sometimes frankly, terrifying, blend of actual herbal knowledge, deeply ingrained ritual, and what we'd now call sympathetic magic. First, the herbs. You'd be amazed at the sheer variety of plants that were believed to hold power over sickness. For a fever, she might prepare a tea from willow bark, and it's a mainstream historical fact that willow bark contains salicin, a natural precursor to aspirin. So, hey, sometimes they stumbled upon something genuinely effective, even if they didn't understand the chemistry. For a cough, a concoction of honey and horehound might be offered, soothing your throat with its sticky sweetness. For a wound, a poultice of comfrey or yarrow, plants known for their wound-healing properties, might be applied. These weren't just picked haphazardly. Mind you, there were specific times to gather certain herbs, some at dawn, some under a full moon, some only when the dew was still fresh on the leaves. The act of gathering was itself a ritual. You might have to whisper certain words to the plant, or leave a small offering, perhaps a coin or a bit of bread, to thank the earth for its bounty. It's all very holistic, isn't it? Almost makes you want to start your own organic, moon-dusted herb garden. Almost, once gathered, the preparation is another art form, grinding with a stone pestle and mortar, infusing in hot water, simmering into a thick decoction, or mashing into a paste for a poultice. You watch as she works, her movements practiced and sure. The smell of the herbs, pungent and earthy, fills your small space. Sometimes, the remedy is ingested, a bitter tea that you have to force down, hoping it does more good than your gag reflex suggests. Other times, it's applied externally. Imagine a warm, damp wool poultice, perhaps made of bread soaked in milk and herbs, or even less appealing ingredients like cow dung. Yes, you heard that right, being slapped onto an aching joint or a swollen wound. The warmth might be comforting, at least you try to focus on that. But the herbs are often just one part of the equation. Enter the charms and rituals. As Old Mother Elmsworth applies her remedy, she might be muttering, not just idle chit-chat, but specific incantations, ancient words passed down through generations, designed to imbue the medicine with power or to drive out the malevolent spirits believed to be causing your illness. These charms could be complex, involving appeals to saints, or sometimes to older, somewhat pre-Christian forces. You might be given an amulet to wear, perhaps a small bag containing a curious mix of dried herbs, a strangely shaped pebble, or even a written prayer folded tightly. The idea is that these objects carry protective power, warding off further sickness or ill luck. Sometimes the charm is written on a piece of parchment with special ink, then carefully sewn into your clothing, or even, in some cases, dissolved in water and drunk. Tasty. And then there's sympathetic magic, the belief that like affects like, or that an action performed on one object can influence another object or person connected to it. This is where things can get particularly creative. Got a nasty wart, a quirky, lesser-known tidbit. For you, a common remedy involved rubbing the wart with a piece of meat, or even a live snail, and then burying the meat or impaling the snail on a thorn bush. The idea was that as the meat rotted, or the snail withered and died, your wart would similarly shrink and disappear. It's all about transference. Feeling weak. Perhaps you'd be encouraged to eat the heart of a brave animal. Got a bleeding wound? A red cloth might be tied around it, or a poultice made with reddish herbs, because red is the color of blood. It makes a certain kind of intuitive sense. If you squint really hard and forget everything you learned in high school biology. Historians still argue whether these elaborate rituals and remedies were purely placebo, offering psychological comfort in a terrifying situation, or if some genuinely effective traditional knowledge was consistently at play. Albeit wrapped in layers of superstition, it's likely a bit of both. The power of belief is a formidable thing, especially when there's nothing else. And that's the crucial point this was, for most people, the only medicine available. There were no grand hospitals for the likes of you, no university-trained physicians making house calls to your humble abode. Those were for the wealthy, the nobility. For you, it's Mother Elmsworth, her bag of herbs, her whispered charms, and the flickering hope that this time, it will work. The rituals themselves, the careful preparation, the focused attention of the healer, all of this provided a sense of agency, a feeling that something was being done. In a world where life was so often precarious and seemingly random, this structured approach to illness was a vital comfort. The tastes, the smells, the textures of these remedies are all intensely real to you. The bitterness of the willowbark tea, the slightly slimy feel of a comfrey poultice, the scratch of a woolen charm against your skin. These sensory details become anchors, something to focus on beyond the pain or the fear. And as the healer finishes her work, perhaps tidying up with a soft hum, you're left with the lingering scent of herbs and a fragile, carefully nurtured seed of hope. Because in the end, when the charms are spoken and the poultices applied, hope is often the strongest ingredient in the mix. You cling to it as you drift in and out of a restless, fevered sleep, waiting to see if the magic or the medicine or just sheer luck will pull you through. And so, with your little bundle of protective charms, perhaps clutched a bit tighter than you'd admit, you find yourself constantly looking upwards, outwards, trying to decipher the world's mood. Because, let's be honest, knowing whether to pack an extra layer of squirrel skins or just resign yourself to a soggy afternoon was, quite literally, a matter of daily survival. Forget your fancy weather apps, which, by the way, sometimes feel about as accurate as Punxsutawney Phil on a grumpy day. Back then, you were the weather app, a walking, breathing barometer of atmospheric intent. You learned to watch the animals, those furry, feathered, or many-legged forecasters who never seem to need a satellite image. Take the cows, for instance. You see them out in the pasture, and if they're all lying down, contentedly chewing their cud, you might hear an elder mutter, "Rain's a-comin'." The practical observation, of course, is that cows prefer to keep a patch of grass dry for themselves when moisture is in the air. But through that magical lens we talked about, it's not just about dry grass. Oh no, the cows know. They are plugged into some bovine information superhighway, receiving dispatches from the great cosmic herdsman about impending downpours. It was all very convenient, really, that the universe decided to use livestock as its primary meteorological messengers. Then there are the birds. Remember how we talked about omens and the flight of birds for divination? Well, their daily patterns are just as telling for the weather. If you see swallows, those swift but darting acrobats of the air, skimming low over the fields or water, it's a pretty good sign that rain is on its way. The insects they feast on fly lower when the air pressure drops and humidity rises before a storm. So the swallows follow their food. Simple cause and effect. But for you, standing there, watching them dip and weave, it feels more profound. It's as if they're trying to sweep the very air clean, or perhaps they're fleeing the invisible tendrils of an approaching storm spirit. Some ancient cultures even believed swallows were sacred, or carried messages from the underworld, so their behavior held layers upon layers of meaning. And the spiders. Oh, the spiders. Not everyone's favorite eight-legged oracle, I grant you. But if you notice them spinning their webs with unusual fervor in the morning, or perhaps building them in more sheltered nooks than usual, it's a good omen for a dry day. Conversely, if they start abandoning their beautifully constructed traps, or seem sluggish, that could mean dampness is settling in. Historians still argue whether these widespread beliefs in animal prescience stemmed from a single, ancient proto-source of wisdom, perhaps carried along migration routes, or if they developed independently in various cultures simply through similar, astute observations of natural phenomena. It's a fascinating chicken or egg, or perhaps spider or fly kind of question. Let's not forget the smaller choir of the insect world, the crickets, for example. Their chirping can be a surprisingly accurate thermometer. You can even find formulas online today to calculate the temperature based on their chirp rate, a little piece of folk wisdom that turned out to be scientifically sound. But in your world, a sudden increase in the franticness of their fiddling, or an unusual silence, might be less about degrees Celsius and more about the imminent arrival of a deluge or a sudden cold snap. The frogs, too, croaking with more gusto than usual down by the creek, aren't just looking for love. They're often heralding rain, their amphibious bodies delighting in the rising humidity. Now, you lift your gaze higher, beyond the tree line, to the ever-shifting canvas of the sky, the clouds, those fluffy, wispy, or sometimes menacing messengers. Hold countless secrets. You've heard the old rhyme, passed down through generations. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in morning, sailor's warning. And this isn't just an old wives' tale. It's a surprisingly reliable piece of forecasting that has stood the test of time. In fact, this observation is ancient, even getting a mention in texts going back millennia, showing how long humans have been trying to make sense of the sky's fiery moods. The science involves dust particles and the way light scatters. But for you, a red sunset is a benevolent spirit painting the sky with a promise of peace, while a crimson dawn is a celestial blush of embarrassment for the bad weather it's about to unleash. Then there are the mackerel skies and mare's tails, those beautiful, rippling cirrocumulus clouds that look like fish scales, and the long, feathery cirrus clouds streaking across the blue. Mackerel sky and mare's tails make lofty ships carry low sails. The saying goes, these high-altitude ice crystal clouds often signify an approaching warm front, meaning a change in weather, often for the wetter, is usually not far behind. It's not a storm god personally etching warnings into the heavens, but rather the upper atmosphere giving you a heads up. Yet, it feels personal, doesn't it? As if the sky itself is alive and communicating directly. And what about a ring around the moon? That pale, ethereal halo. Or sometimes even around the sun, though it's harder to look at. This, too, is caused by ice crystals in high cirrus clouds, bending the light. And like those mare's tails, it's often a precursor to rain or snow within a day or two. Magically speaking, you might see it as the moon donning its storm coat, or perhaps a sacred circle, a sign that the celestial energies are particularly potent, and caution is advised. It's a far cry from understanding atmospheric optics, but the predictive power was there, gleaned from centuries of sky watching. It's not just the grand visual spectacles, either. Other, more subtle natural signs speak volumes to the observant. You might notice the smoke from your neighbor's chimney. If it rises straight up, like an arrow pointing to a clear sky, fair weather is likely to hold. But if it curls downwards, lazily hugging the ground, it suggests low atmospheric pressure, a heavy and damp air that often brings rain or snow. It's simple physics, warm air from the fire rising into cooler, denser air. But again, it's easy to imagine the smoke itself is reluctant, unwilling to ascend into a troubled sky. Pine cones become your pocket hygrometers. You see them scattered on the forest floor. When the air is dry, their scales open wide, as if a tiny wooden flower is blooming, releasing their seeds. But when moisture is in the air, those scales clamp shut, protecting their precious cargo. It's a wonderfully simple, elegant mechanism. No magic here, just clever plant biology. But for someone attuned to nature's whispers, it's another voice in the chorus predicting the day's temperament. A quirky little tidbit is that some people even kept a weather stick, a specially chosen branch of balsam fir, perhaps hung outdoors. The branch would curl upwards in high pressure, fair weather, and downwards in low pressure, foul weather, acting as a natural barometer. It's amazing how these simple tools, born from observation, worked. And then there are the signs within your own body. That old ache in your knee. Remember? Or perhaps a twinge in a long-healed wound that seems to flare up just before a storm. Changes in barometric pressure and humidity can indeed affect human physiology, causing tissues to expand or contract slightly, especially around joints. Today, your doctor might explain it with medical jargon, but back then, you feel it as your body being in tune with the world, a sensitive instrument resonating with the Earth's subtle shifts. It's not just an ache, it's the weather speaking through you. It's almost as if some people are personally calibrated to the atmosphere, much to the amusement of their less sensitive family members who just check their phones. So, you see, this constant reading of signs wasn't just idle superstition. It was a skill, honed over lifetimes, blending sharp empirical observation with a worldview that saw intention and communication in every rustle of leaves, every flight of a bird, every pattern in the clouds. The data was real. Lower bird flight does often precede rain, but the interpretation was filtered through that magical lens, transforming the mundane mechanics of meteorology into a rich, ongoing dialogue with a living, breathing, and often quite moody world. It was about survival, yes, but also about feeling connected, a part of the grand, unfolding story written in the sky and whispered by the wind. And even now, when you see a particularly vibrant red sunset, or notice the cows all settled down in a field, a little part of you, deep down, might just wonder. So, after all that careful observation, all those attempts to decode the whispers of the wind or the patterns of the migrating birds, what happens when the forecast you've pieced together is, well, less than ideal? And you don't have a sleek weather app, just a knot in your stomach as the sky turns that peculiar, unsettling shade of bruised purple, or stays stubbornly, endlessly blue when all you need is rain. You find yourself, don't you, feeling profoundly small, a tiny speck under an immense, indifferent sky. It's only natural, then, that, through millennia, we humans have tried to do more than just read the celestial memo. We've tried to send a reply, to nudge the narrative, to command the clouds. Well, maybe. It's a very human impulse, isn't it? To try and control the uncontrollable, a bit like trying to teach quantum physics to your goldfish. Ambitious, certainly. You can almost feel the parched, cracked earth beneath your bare feet. Each fissure, a silent scream for moisture. The sun, a relentless, incandescent orb, has been dominating the heavens for what feels like an eternity, baking the life out of the land. Your fledgling crops, once so green and hopeful, are now brittle, yellowing husks. The village well is a muddy memory, and that buoyant optimism you nurtured in the spring is shriveling up like a forgotten grape. So, what's the recourse when hopeful glances skyward yield nothing but more blinding sun? You join the others. You become part of a collective yearning, a communal effort to coax life back from the sky. You might find yourself in a procession, a slow, deliberate movement across the sun-scorched landscape, the dust rising in soft puffs with each synchronized step. Perhaps you're chanting a low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate right through your chest, a sound intended to awaken something ancient, to gently persuade the forces that hold the reins captive. You see figures dancing, their bodies swaying, their limbs tracing patterns in the air, movements that might mimic the graceful fall of nourishing rain, the rustle of wind through lush, wet leaves, or even the sinuous, powerful undulations of a water serpent. A creature revered in countless cultures as a bringer of an essential element. Think of the deeply spiritual, intricate rain dances of various Native American tribes, like the Hopi or the Zuni. These weren't spontaneous street parties. You understand? These were meticulously choreographed, sacred ceremonies, often involving specific, consecrated regalia, potent symbols, and complex sequences of steps and songs passed down through countless generations. The entire community's well-being, their very survival, could feel like it rested on the perfect execution of these rituals. It wasn't just about going through the motions. It was about belief, focus, and a profound connection to the natural world. You might also be involved in more direct, symbolic actions, perhaps the ceremonial pouring of precious water onto the thirsty ground, a small offering to encourage a larger gift. Or maybe you're meticulously crafting images of dark, heavy rain clouds, or drawing symbols of lightning and thunder. This is the heart of sympathetic magic, the age-old principle that like produces like. If you enact the rain, if you embody its arrival with enough conviction, maybe, just maybe, the real thing will be compelled to follow. It's a bit like when you find yourself talking to your computer when it freezes, whispering sweet nothings or issuing stern commands. You know, deep down, it's probably not listening, but it feels like you're doing something, doesn't it? But what if the problem isn't a glaring lack of rain, but rather an overabundance of the wrong, terrifying kind? Imagine the wind, not as a gentle caress, but as a shrieking, demonic force, tearing at your roof, rattling your very bones. The sky, not a canvas of gentle blues and whites, but a battleground, constantly split by jagged, blinding spears of lightning. And then the hail. Hailstones the size of pigeon eggs, or worse, hammering down with relentless fury, threatening your home, your livestock, your life. You're huddled inside, the familiar sense of helplessness washing over you again. But this time, it's laced with a raw, primal fear. This is where the personal charms, the individual and localized acts of defiance or placation, come into their own. You might clutch a special amulet, perhaps a piece of amber believed to absorb ill will, or a stone found by a riverbank, worn smooth by centuries of water, now imbued with its protective essence. Or maybe you're whispering an incantation, a specific sequence of ancient words passed down from your grandmother, a verbal shield against the storm's destructive rage, the syllables feeling cool and calming on your tongue, even as your heart hammers. In medieval Europe, a particularly interesting and impressively loud method was the ringing of church bells. It was widely and fervently believed that the consecrated, booming sound of these massive bells could physically dissipate storms, disrupting the malevolent spirits or demons thought to be riding the tempestuous winds. So, picture it: the storm is at its peak, rain lashing down, thunder cracking overhead, and instead of cowering, dedicated, perhaps slightly reckless, bell ringers would ascend the swaying church tower. They'd risk life and limb, pulling on the heavy ropes to send those powerful, resonant vibrations out into the violent, churning air. The clang and boom would echo for miles, a defiant, sonic barrier against the perceived evil. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such courageous or perhaps foolhardy acts was a genuine, practical belief in their meteorological efficacy, or if it was more about fostering communal resilience, a powerful demonstration of faith, and a way to feel some agency in the face of nature's overwhelming and terrifying power. It's a bit like carrying your lucky pen into an exam. You know it won't magically fill in the answers, but it just feels better, doesn't it? Beyond these individual charms and more localized rituals, there were, of course, the grander, communal endeavors aimed at appeasing the perceived masters of the meteorological theater, the weather deities, the elemental spirits, the great cosmic forces. These weren't just about requesting a shower or trying to shoo away a single inconvenient thunderstorm. These were about maintaining a delicate, ongoing diplomatic relationship with the powers that ultimately controlled the faucet of the firmament. You see, in many ancient and not-so-ancient belief systems, the weather wasn't just a collection of random atmospheric phenomena, not like the slightly off-kilter forecast on your phone app that promised sun and delivered a downpour. Oh no. The weather was a direct expression, the mood swing of a powerful god, the audible sigh of an ancient earth spirit, or the very deliberate, often pointed, intervention of a supreme entity. So, if your local thunder god was having a particularly bad day, you'd know it from the percussive symphony overhead. If a sky goddess felt neglected, those lightning bolts weren't just for dramatic effect. They were a message. Appeasement, therefore, was absolutely paramount. This could manifest in elaborate, vibrant festivals, precisely timed to specific solstices, equinoxes, or agricultural cycles. Offerings would be carefully prepared and presented, the first, choicest fruits of the harvest. Precious white, fragrant libations poured onto sacred ground. Sometimes, in more desperate times or within certain belief structures, even animal sacrifices. All depending on the specific culture and the perceived level of divine displeasure or the urgency of the need. Imagine entire communities gathering, a palpable sense of shared purpose and anxious hope uniting them to offer fervent prayers and perform age-old ceremonies designed to soothe an apparently angry sky god, or to gently coax a benevolent smile from a notoriously capricious wind spirit. Priests, priestesses, shamans, or other spiritual leaders would often orchestrate these significant events. They were the acknowledged specialists, the interpreters of celestial moods and meteorological omens, the ones who supposedly knew the correct words, the precise gestures, the sacred rhythms needed to hopefully, prayerfully, tip the atmospheric scales in humanity's favor. It's a bit like trying to negotiate with a very determined toddler who is mid-meltdown in the supermarket sweet aisle by offering them their absolute favorite, normally forbidden, chocolate bar. You're not entirely sure what triggered the initial outburst, but you're desperately hoping this peace offering will bring tranquility, at least for a little while. And as you stand there, amidst the chanting or the solemn silence, you can't help but feel a thread of connection to those who stood in similar circles, under similar skies, hoping for a similar intervention, countless generations before you. And just as you try to coax the skies to rain, or perhaps not rain, depending on your very specific meteorological needs, like we explored with those intricate weather charms, you'd also turn your attention downward, to the very soil beneath your feet. You feel its cool dampness, its earthy scent filling your nostrils as you prepare it. This isn't just dirt. You understand. This is the earth, the giver of life, and she has her preferences, her moods, her subtle ways of communicating. You wouldn't just haphazardly toss seeds into the ground and hope for the best. Oh no. That would be like showing up to a royal banquet in your pajamas, profoundly disrespectful and unlikely to yield a feast. It's about a conversation, a negotiation. Really, your primary consultant, your agricultural advisor with an impeccable, millennia-spanning track record, is, of course, the moon. She hangs up there, a silent, silver observer, waxing and waning, and you watch her with the focused intensity of a day trader watching the stock market. Or perhaps, more accurately, like a devoted fan tracking their favorite influencers' every post for vital life hacks. Planting by the moon isn't some quaint, niche hobby you'd read about on an obscure blog. It's serious, life-sustaining business. The Old Farmer's Almanac which, by the way, has been doling out celestial advice and planting charts since its first publication in 1792, still dedicates significant pages to it. So, you see, your ancestors weren't just whimsically gazing at the night sky. They were diligently checking their cosmic planting calendar, their livelihoods quite literally depending on it. You learn, through careful observation and passed down wisdom, that root crops, the ones that burrow deep like carrots, parsnips, and potatoes, those shy vegetables that prefer the comforting darkness, they need to be planted during the dark of the moon, the waning phase. You can almost feel the logic in your bones. As the moon's visible light recedes, the energy of the earth is thought to draw downwards, concentrating its power beneath the surface, encouraging robust, healthy root growth. Then, for your above-ground show-offs, your leafy greens reaching for the light, your proud corn stalks standing tall, your juicy tomatoes blushing in the sun, you wait for the waxing moon. As its light is growing, that vibrant energy is believed to draw plant vigor upwards, towards the sky. Get it wrong. Plant your potatoes under a swelling moon, and you might end up with sprawling tops, but disappointingly small tubers. Plant your lettuce when the moon is shrinking, and it might just bolt prematurely. It's enough to make your modern, high-tech organic kale app throw its digital hands up in despair. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of lunar planting was based on meticulous, empirical observation passed down through generations, countless seasons of trial and error, careful notes on what thrived and what failed, or simply a deeply ingrained cultural response to the powerful, visible celestial cycles that governed so much of ancient life. Perhaps it was a comforting blend of both, a framework for understanding the uncontrollable. You, however, in this moment, you're not debating agricultural history. You're just trying to get your beans to plump, to feel that satisfying swell in the pod. And speaking of beans, there's a charmingly specific tidbit that highlights this lunar focus in some regions. It was absolutely crucial to plant your beans when the moon was swelling, waxing. That is, plant them during a waning moon, and lore dictated you'd get stringy. Sad little things. Hardly worth the effort of shelling. Imagine the quiet pressure, the focused attention, your entire village's winter bean supply, those vital proteins, resting on your accurate lunar calculations. No pressure at all, right? Similarly, you'd never dream of planting cucumbers during certain inauspicious moon phases, lest they turn out bitter and inedible, leading to a summer of truly regrettable pickles, and perhaps even some side-eye from your neighbors. It's these intricate little details, these whispered traditions, that transform farming from a mere physical task into a delicate, almost reverent dance with cosmic forces. Beyond the moon, specific dates in the calendar hold immense power. These aren't just arbitrary marks on a page. They are often ancient festivals, echoes of Beltane's fertile fires, or Lammas's first grains, times when the veil between worlds is traditionally considered thin, and the earth is particularly receptive to magical influence and earnest entreaties. You might choose May Day, for instance, a day humming with ancient energies of growth and renewal, to plant certain crops especially associated with fertility. As you do, you might leave a small offering, a libation of fresh milk or golden honey, perhaps a bit of your own homebrewed ale, poured directly onto the freshly turned soil. It's a quiet, personal way of saying, here you go, Earth. Thank you for your patience. Have a little something for your trouble. And please, be kind to these seeds. The act of planting itself is steeped in ritual. You don't just mechanically dig a hole and drop in a seed. You might walk the perimeter of your field at dawn or dusk, the air still and quiet, chanting softly, your words weaving a protective spell, a blanket of intention around the future bounty. Or perhaps you bury symbolic items with the very first seeds, a small, smooth egg for fertility and new life. a worn coin for prosperity, and a plentiful return. It's a down payment, an investment in the land's goodwill, a tangible expression of hope. You're not just a farmer, you're a priest or priestess of the soil, a caretaker in a sacred pact. As your crops begin to push through the soil, tiny green shoots of promise, you don't just sit back and idly wait. You patrol your fields, not just for deer or rabbits, but for signs, for omens, for the subtle moods of the plants themselves. You might tie ribbons of a specific, auspicious color to young fruit trees to encourage them to bear heavily, or whisper words of encouragement to the struggling seedlings on a cold morning. Remember those little protective charms we talked about earlier, the ones for hearth and home? You bet some of them, or similar bespoke creations, are finding their way into the fields, tucked among the rows of sprouting life, warding off blight, destructive insects, bad weather, and perhaps even the envious gaze or ill wishes of a less successful or less respectful neighbor. And then comes the harvest, the glorious, anxious culmination of all your hopes, your hard work, and your meticulous lunar observations. This isn't a frantic, greedy grab-and-go operation. The first fruits are sacred. You handle them with reverence. You offer them back to the earth, or to the spirits of the land who helped them grow. With heartfelt gratitude, a perfect sheaf of wheat, the plumpest apples from the sunniest branch, the first ripe berries gleaming like jewels, these are tokens of thanks, an acknowledgement that ensures the land remains generous, willing to provide again next season. Harvest festivals, vibrant with feasting, music, and communal celebration, are not just parties. They are essential acts of reciprocity. You took from the land, and now you give back your joy, your thanks, your energy, completing the cycle. And you thought your family Thanksgiving dinner, with its seating charts and specific serving spoons, had a lot of unspoken rules. Appeasing the land, keeping it sweet, as they say, is paramount. Fail to do so, and the consequences could be dire. Poor yields, blighted crops, sick livestock. The land, in this worldview, has a memory and a temper. So, you might leave the last few stalks of grain standing in the field as an offering to the spirit of the harvest, ensuring it has a place to rest until the next season, or pour out a bit of your best ale onto the ground before you take your first drink from the new batch. These aren't grand, theatrical gestures. Usually, they're small, consistent acts of respect, woven into the fabric of daily life. Imagine trying to explain to your modern HOA why you're religiously bearing perfectly good ale in your front lawn every few weeks. It's for the soil spirits. Brenda, part of my comprehensive land appeasement strategy. Try to keep up. But for you, in this quiet, focused world, it makes perfect, intuitive sense. The earth isn't an inanimate resource to be exploited. It's a living, breathing entity, a powerful partner, and your survival, your community's well-being, depends entirely on its favor. You're tending not just to crops, but to a profound, ancient relationship, one as old as humanity itself, a continuous dialogue spoken in cycles of planting, patient growth, and the hopeful, golden abundance of the harvest moon. You find yourself standing at the edge of your newly planted field, the scent of damp earth and hopeful greenery filling your nostrils. But a shiver runs down your spine, and it's not just the morning chill. You know, deep in your bones, that 1,000 unseen threats lurk, ready to undo all your hard work. We're talking blight, those creeping fungal fingers that can turn a vibrant crop into a pile of mush overnight. And of course, the ever-present threat of thieves, both the two-legged and the many-legged kind. Your carefully tended rows of, say, turnips, because who doesn't love a versatile turnip, look vulnerable under the vast, uncaring sky. You remember all the effort, the backbreaking labor of tilling and planting, and the thought of it all coming to naught is, frankly, terrifying. Your first line of defense, naturally, isn't a high-tech security system or some fancy organic pesticide. Oh no, you're reaching for something far more traditional. You remember the village elder, her voice like rustling leaves, explaining the importance of protective charms. So, you carefully craft one. Perhaps it's a small, unassuming pouch, stitched with homespun thread. Inside, you place specific herbs, rue, for its sharp scent, believed to repel negativity and sharpen your own senses against danger. Dill, because you heard it's good for warding off dark magic and, as a bonus, makes a lovely pickle. And, of course, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, because you really don't want to forget where you buried your emergency stash of particularly good ale, which, let's be honest, is just as vital as the turnips. You might also add a hagstone to this little ensemble. Remember the stones with a naturally occurring hole, perfect for squinting through to see into the fey realm, or more practically for today's purposes, for stringing onto a piece of sturdy twine. You then hang this charm from the branch of the biggest fruit tree in your orchard, or perhaps on a post at the corner of your most promising wheat field. It's believed to deter, well, a whole host of unseen mischief makers. Nobody's entirely sure what specific entity it's meant to offend or scare away. But it's a bit like today how some people put those little reflective owls in their gardens. Do they really scare away the pigeons eyeing your prized tomatoes? Maybe. Does it make you feel a little more in control? A little more proactive? Absolutely. It's the medieval equivalent of putting a no junk mail sticker on your spiritual letterbox. Then, you turn your attention to specific plantings around the border of your field, creating a living, breathing line of defense. Marigolds, with their sunny, almost aggressively cheerful orange and yellow faces, aren't just for brightening up the place. You plant them diligently along the edges of your vegetable patch. Their pungent aroma, which you find rather pleasant, is believed to confuse and repel burrowing pests like nematodes and certain types of unwanted insect guests that might otherwise view your tender seedlings as an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's a bit like using citronella candles today to keep mosquitoes from crashing your summer barbecue. Only your entire livelihood depends on these floral sentinels, not just a pleasant, itch-free evening. Elder trees, too, hold a special significance. You've heard the whispers, the stories passed down through generations, that they're sacred to the good folk, the fae. Cutting one down without permission, or even damaging it, is basically rolling out the unwelcome mat for all sorts of misfortune, from soured milk to mysteriously missing tools. So, you make sure to plant one, or respectfully maintain an existing one at each corner of your main plot, or near the entrance to your farmstead. They stand as silent, leafy guardians, their white blossoms in spring and dark berries in autumn, a constant reminder of the unseen world coexisting with yours. Historians still argue whether these specific plantings were chosen for genuine, observable, pest-repelling or soil-improving properties that were later mythologized, or if the deep-rooted belief in their spiritual power came first, and any practical, ecological benefit was simply a happy and very welcome coincidence. Now, let's talk about the dreaded blight, that insidious and a creeping rot that can sweep through a field of potatoes or wheat with terrifying speed, turning hope into despair almost overnight. Remember how vital those staple crops are, not just for your family's survival, filling your bellies through the lean winter months, but for the community, for trade, for everything we've touched upon concerning daily bread and, well, not starving. One common practice to ward it off is to ritually walk the boundaries of your field at specific, auspicious times. This might be at dawn on a particular saint's day, or perhaps during a certain phase of the moon, which, as we know, governs so much. As you walk, you might be chanting specific protective verses, ancient words passed down, or reciting prayers to a patron saint of agriculture. You could carry a lit torch, its flame symbolizing purification and the sun's life-giving energy, or sprinkle blessed water, sanctifying the ground and creating a spiritual fence. This is a bit more involved than just setting up a fancy irrigation system or checking a weather app. The core idea is to purify the land and establish an invisible, yet potent, barrier that malevolent spirits, or unseen blights, often blamed for crop diseases, cannot cross. A mainstream historical fact that resonates deeply here is the devastating impact of potato blight in Ireland during the mid-19th century, an event starkly known as the Great Famine. It serves as a grim reminder of just how vulnerable pre-modern populations were to widespread crop diseases before the advancements of agricultural science. While superstitions and charms ultimately couldn't halt that level of catastrophe, you can absolutely understand the profound, desperate human need to try anything and everything in their power to protect their sustenance. Sometimes, if a particular pest was identified as the culprit, little effigies of that creature, say a locust or a weevil, fashioned from straw or clay, would be made. These would then be ritually tried, condemned, and then burned or banished from the fields in a symbolic act of expulsion. Imagine a tiny straw weevil, looking rather dapper despite its impending doom, being ceremoniously set alight. It must have been quite cathartic, if nothing else. Take that, you grain-guzzling fiend. Mahok for your precious livestock, your prized dairy cow, Bess, whose creamy milk is essential for that butter and cheese we talked about making. Or your flock of rather dim-witted, but incredibly useful chickens. The concerns are similar, but with a furry or feathery twist. Diseases in animals, like murrain in cattle, or various ailments affecting sheep and pigs, could sweep through a herd or flock with alarming speed, decimating your four-legged assets. So, you take precautions. You might tie bright red ribbons to their tails or around their horns. Red, as we've noted before, is a famously protective color across many cultures, believed to ward off the evil eye and ill fortune, a bit like those red string bracelets some people wear for good luck or protection even today. You might also hang a hold stone, that versatile hagstone again, in the barn or stable, not just for general fey repelling, but specifically to prevent night riding by witches who were believed to sneak in, borrow your best horses, and ride them to exhaustion during their nocturnal escapades, leaving them sweaty and useless the next day. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit connected to animal health is the ancient practice of need fire or force fire. If a serious disease struck the cattle of a village, a drastic ritual was enacted. All existing fires in every household would be painstakingly extinguished. Then, a new, pure fire would be kindled by friction, often using specific types of wood, like oak, a laborious process requiring communal effort. Once this sacred flame was established, the afflicted cattle, and sometimes all the livestock, would be driven between two bonfires made from this need fire or through its smoke. This was believed to purify them and banish the sickness. It sounds like a massive undertaking, incredibly smoky, and probably quite stressful for poor Bess and her bovine companions. Sorry, girls, just a quick sacred sauna. You'll thank us later, probably when you stop coughing. And then, of course, there's theft. Not just the sneaky fox with an eye on your plumpest chicken, or the crafty badger digging under the fence, but human thieves, those opportunistic individuals eyeing your carefully stored grain, your fattened pig destined for the winter feast, or even your farming implements, boundary rituals, like the ones for protecting crops, play a part here too. You might bury objects like old iron knives, horseshoes, or specially marked stones at the entrances to your property, under gates, or at stiles. Iron, as we've probably touched upon before in our shadowy explorations, is a classic repellent of supernatural baddies, ghosts, malevolent fae, and the like. By extension, it seems, it was hoped it might also give a human thief a moment of superstitious pause. They might think, scratching their head. This farmer is serious. They've got the good anti-ghost iron deployed. Maybe I'll go bother Jeff down the road. He only uses old socks for protection, and they don't even match. You might also take the time to paint protective symbols on your barn doors, on the gate posts, or even carved into the lintels above doorways. These could be complex, esoteric sigils known only to a few, or simple, yet powerful, ancient marks, like the hexafoil, a six-petaled flower design, sometimes mistakenly called a witch's mark, but more often used for apotropaic, or protective purposes. It's the medieval equivalent of putting up a very stern, beware of dog with magical backup sign, but with more occult oomph. Sometimes, these weren't just about passively warding off trouble. Some charms or inscribed objects were designed to actively punish thieves, perhaps by causing their ill-gotten gains to spoil, their hands to wither, or leading them to become hopelessly lost and wander in circles if they tried to make off with your goods. A bit more proactive, shall we say, than a modern CCTV camera, which mostly just provides a grainy recording of your stuff being nicked after the fact. And let's not forget the subtle but potent power of a well-placed, carefully worded curse, perhaps whispered into a knotted cord that is then buried on your land, or tied to a thief's post. The underlying idea is that if someone wronged you by stealing from your livelihood, the land itself, or the local spirits tied to it, would seek retribution on your behalf. This is where things can get a little morally ambiguous, a bit more dark arts than helpful household hints. But when it's your family's survival on the line, when starvation is a genuine fear, you might find your personal definition of gray area becomes surprisingly flexible. Finally, you remember the power of community in these protective endeavors. While many of these are personal or household level charms and rituals, often the entire village would participate in larger communal rites, like beating the bounds. This annual or semi-annual event involved the community, led by local dignitaries or religious figures, walking the parish boundaries, often beating boundary markers with willow wands, reaffirming them not just physically but spiritually. This communal effort reinforced the idea that everyone had a stake in protecting the collective resources, the fields, and the livestock that sustained them all. It's a far cry from simply locking your own front door. It's about weaving an intricate, shared web of belief, ritual, and mutual responsibility around everything you collectively hold dear. You wipe a bead of sweat from your brow, feeling the sun climb higher in the sky. The charms are set, the boundaries ritually reinforced. The marigolds are, well, they're still very orange, and hopefully doing their job. For now, you've done all you can. Now, you just have to wait, and hope that the unseen world, and your equally unseen, but hopefully honest neighbors, respect the effort, or at least are mildly intimidated by the sheer, bewildering number of oddly placed stones, bits of string, and strategically planted flowers. And so, as you settle deeper into that understanding of the unseen, you find your attention drawn, almost magnetically, to the very structure that shelters you. Your home? Not just a collection of bricks and mortar, or wood and plaster, but a sanctuary, a fortress against against the things that go bump in the night or try to slide in through the mail slot. Tonight, we're peering into the charmingly paranoid world of Guardians of the Threshold, exploring all those little, and sometimes quite large, superstitions centered on protecting your humble abode from unwelcome influences, especially where it's most vulnerable, those pesky entry points. You're standing, perhaps, in your own hallway now, or maybe just imagining one. That front door, it's more than just a barrier against the elements or overly enthusiastic neighbors, isn't it? For centuries, the threshold, that strip of wood or stone you step over, has been a potent symbolic boundary. You've probably heard you shouldn't step on the threshold in some cultures, or how a groom traditionally carries his bride over it. This isn't just romantic fluff. It's rooted in the idea of protecting the bride from any lurking nasties that might be loitering at the doorstep, waiting to trip her up, literally or spiritually. It's a clean entry, a fresh start, untainted by whatever invisible gunk might be clinging to the ground outside. Think about what people hang over or on their doors. The classic horseshoe, open end up, of course, so all the good luck doesn't spill out. It's like a tiny, rusty, equine good luck magnet, or maybe bundles of herbs. Rosemary for remembrance and protection, sage for purification, much like we discussed with smudging rituals earlier. Sometimes, specific symbols are painted or carved pentagrams, the protective kind. Mind you, sun wheels, or even just a splash of a particular color. Paint blue, for instance, especially popular in the American South, was believed to mimic water, which spirits supposedly couldn't cross. It's a lovely shade. Really, even if your primary concern is curb appeal rather than spectral trespassers. A mainstream historical fact for you, the ancient Romans placed great importance on Janus, the god of doorways, gates, and transitions, who literally had two faces to watch both entry and exit. His blessing was sought to ensure only good things pass through. Now, let your gaze drift to the windows. Ah, windows. The eyes of the house, as they say. And like eyes, they can let in light, but also unwanted gazes, or, less tangible peeping toms. You might notice how older homes sometimes have a cross pattern in their window panes. While often a structural choice, it didn't hurt that it also doubled as a Christian symbol, offering a bit of divine deterrence. People would place specific plants on windowsills. Geraniums were thought to ward off evil spirits in some European traditions, their bright colors a cheerful, not today Satan to any passing gloom. You might even find little charms, like those we looked at for personal protection, dangling discreetly in the corner of a window. Keeping windows clean was sometimes considered important, not just for a clear view, but to allow benevolent spirits easy passage, or to ensure malicious ones couldn't hide in the grime. Conversely, some believed a little dust kept the fey folk from peering in too closely. It's a bit like modern privacy settings, isn't it? Do not track spectral entities. Then there's the chimney. Oh, the chimney. A direct, open highway from the outside world straight into the heart of your home. The hearth. You can almost hear the faint, sooty whisper of countless stories about what might come. Down it. Witches, of course, were famously associated with chimney travel. It was their preferred mode of B&E, apparently. So, you'd find things like witch balls, those beautiful, often mirrored glass orbs, hung in or near fireplaces. The idea was that a witch would be captivated by her own reflection, or by the swirling colors, and become trapped or distracted. Or perhaps they just liked shiny things, like oversized magpies with pointy hats. Chimney crooks, specially shaped iron implements, were also sometimes said to deter unwelcome visitors from above. Even the act of sweeping the chimney beyond its practical fire prevention purpose, could be seen as ritually cleansing this vulnerable entry point. It's funny how Santa Claus neatly co-opted this entryway, turning a potential point of fear into one of festive anticipation. Though, if you think about it, a strange man sliding down your chimney in the dead of night, still a bit unsettling, even if he brings presents. But the real secrets, the truly dedicated guardians, are often hidden from view, tucked away within the very fabric of the building. You're walking on floorboards, leaning against walls, and you might have no idea what's concealed just inches away, placed there generations ago. This brings us to a fascinating and slightly peculiar practice, the intentional concealment of objects within walls or under foundations. One of the most common and quirky finds is the concealed shoe. Archaeologists and renovators frequently discover single shoes, often well-worn, bricked into chimney breasts, hidden under hearthstones, or nestled between wall joists, particularly in buildings dating from the 16th to the early 20th century. This isn't just someone losing their boot during construction. These are deliberate deposits. Historians still argue whether these concealed items were primarily for bringing good luck to the inhabitants, or specifically to act as apotropaic devices, actively repelling evil. The shoe, being so personal and shaped by the wearer, was thought to act as a decoy or a trap for malevolent spirits. They'd go for the shoe, thinking it was a person, and get stuck. Tricky, those old-timers. It wasn't just shoes, though. Sometimes more macabre items were found, like dried cats, often posed in an aggressive stance, as if to frighten away vermin, both physical and spiritual. This practice, while unsettling to our modern sensibilities, was believed to be a powerful form of protection. Coins were also common, perhaps as an offering to the spirit of the place, or to ensure future prosperity. And then there are witch bottles, stoneware or glass bottles filled with a rather unsavory concoction of pins, nails, human hair, nail clippings, and even urine. These were buried under hearths or thresholds, designed to ensnare and torment any witch or evil spirit that might try to harm the household. The spirit would be drawn to the personal items, enter the bottle, and then be pierced by the sharp objects, effectively neutralizing the threat. It's a kind of ancient, rather gross, spiritual alarm system. You might even find, if you're renovating an old house, remnants of food offerings or small carved figures in the foundations. Harking back to, well, remember those foundation sacrifices we touched upon in a much earlier context. These are the tamer symbolic echoes. Today, we mostly just seal time capsules in walls, hoping future generations will be mildly amused by our quaint iPhones and fidget spinners, rather than warding off ethereal intruders. Though, come to think of it, maybe a particularly annoying TikTok trend video sealed in a wall could scare off a sensitive ghost. Just a thought. So, as you look around your own space, perhaps with a newfound appreciation for its unseen defenses, you understand that every nook and cranny, every doorway and window has a history steeped in the human desire to feel safe, protected, and truly at home. And now, let's tiptoe back into the familiar comfort of our own homes, or, well, what used to be comforting. Before we started looking for omens in every nook and cranny, you're in your kitchen, perhaps making a nice, calming cup of tea, or maybe you're attempting one of those elaborate internet recipes that promises a Michelin star experience, but usually just delivers a mountain of dishes. And then it happens. That little tremor in your hand, a moment of distraction, and whoosh, the salt cellar goes tumbling. A pristine white drift, like a miniature snowstorm, spreads across your countertop. Your heart, just for a second, does a little flutter kick of panic. spilled salt, the classic, even now, in our hyper-rational, Wi-Fi saturated world, there's that tiny ancestral voice whispering, uh-oh. This isn't just about a messy counter, is it? It's bad luck, pure and simple, or so they say. The immediate, almost instinctual reaction for many, even those who claim not to be superstitious, is to pinch a bit of that errant sodium chloride and toss it over their left shoulder. Why the left? Well, that's supposedly where the devil, or some other mischievous entity, likes to hang out, just waiting for an opportunity to cause trouble. A face full of salt, apparently, is enough to send him packing. Quite the effective, if slightly aggressive, spiritual repellent. One wonders if pepper spray would be more efficient. But tradition is tradition. Salt, you see, wasn't always just that cheap stuff in a cardboard cylinder we pick up at the supermarket. For much of human history, salt was incredibly valuable. White gold, they called it. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, which is where we get the word salary from. That's a mainstream historical fact for you, right there. So, spilling it wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was like dropping a few coins, or in some contexts, a significant chunk of your paycheck. No wonder it became associated with misfortune. Losing something valuable, inviting waste. These are precursors to bad times. Historians still argue whether the superstition arose primarily from its economic value or from older, sacred associations with purity and preservation. But the economic sting certainly didn't help its reputation when spilled. And it's funny how these things linger. You might not believe, but you still do the shoulder toss. A little ritual, a nod to the past, or maybe just a way to make yourself feel a tiny bit better about your clumsiness. It's like updating your antivirus software. Probably not going to stop a rogue asteroid, but it makes you feel safer from the digital gremlins, right? Maybe the devil now has salt-proof goggles. Who knows? Or perhaps he's just moved on to complaining about buffering speeds like the rest of us. All right, so you've dealt with the salt crisis. Your left shoulder is satisfyingly gritty, and you move on with your day. Perhaps you're heading to the bathroom, admiring your handiwork, when disaster strikes anew. Your reflection, usually so obliging, suddenly fractures into 100 jagged pieces. The mirror, your trusty companion for checking if there's spinach in your teeth, lies shattered. 7 years bad luck. That's the big one. Isn't it? Not just a fleeting inconvenience, but a long-haul curse. 7 years? That's longer than some celebrity marriages, and certainly more impactful than that time you accidentally wore mismatched socks. The dread associated with a broken mirror is ancient, far older than glass mirrors themselves. The earliest mirrors were pools of still water, or polished obsidian, like those we talked about for scrying. Remember? The belief was that your reflection wasn't just light bouncing back. It was a glimpse of your soul, your very essence. So, to break a mirror, or disturb that reflected image, was to damage your soul, or at the very least, trap a part of it within the shards. Terrifying stuff, really. No wonder people were keen to avoid it. The Romans are often credited with the 7 years part of the superstition. They believed that life renewed itself in 7-year cycles. So, if your soul was damaged, it would take a full cycle for it to heal, and for the bad luck to dissipate. It's a rather grim sentence for a moment of clumsiness. Imagine telling your insurance company, "Yeah, it's not just the mirror. I need coverage for 7 years of existential dread and probable misfortune." They'd probably just send you a pamphlet on mindfulness and a list of approved therapists. Now, if you do find yourself staring at a mosaic of your former self, don't despair entirely. Our ancestors, ever resourceful, came up with countermeasures. one common practice was to gather all the pieces very carefully. Of course, because 7 years bad luck plus. A nasty cut is just adding insult to injury. And bury them, preferably under the moonlight. Or you could take the fragments and grind them into dust, scattering them to the winds, so no single piece could hold your soul captive. Another method involved throwing the pieces into running water, like a river, so the bad luck would be carried away. A quirky little tidbit for you: in some parts of 17th century England, people would actually kill a mirror if a very ill person was in the house, by covering it or even intentionally breaking it once the person passed, to prevent their spirit from being trapped. A rather proactive, if somewhat destructive, approach to spiritual well-being. It makes you wonder about those funhouse mirrors, doesn't it? Distorting your reflection into bizarre shapes. Are they just accumulating tiny bits of bad luck with every giggle they induce? Or perhaps they're so overtly playful they get a pass. One hopes so. Let's say you've navigated the minefield of your kitchen and bathroom, and now you're settling down for a cozy evening. Perhaps you have a fireplace, or maybe just a few candles flickering, casting those dancing shadows we find so hypnotic. Fire, the heart of the home for millennia, long before central heating and Netflix. And just like everything else, its behavior is closely watched for. You guessed it, signs and portents. You're gazing into the flames, lost in thought, when suddenly the fire sputters and spits aggressively. Or maybe a log cracks with an unusually loud pop-ain't, sending a shower of sparks onto the hearth. Your ancestral alarm bells, though perhaps a bit muffled by modern comfort, might just start to jingle. A fire that burns brightly and steadily. That's good news. It signifies warmth, prosperity, and a happy home. But a fire that struggles, that smokes excessively, or, heaven forbid, goes out unexpectedly without a clear reason, like a sudden gust of wind from a securely closed window. That's a bad omen, suggesting trouble ahead, perhaps illness, or a visitor who brings ill fortune. It's like your Wi-Fi dropping out during a critical download, a sign that the universe is just not on your side today. The color of the flames, too, was significant. Blue flames, for instance, were sometimes said to indicate the presence of spirits or very cold weather approaching. If the sparks flew particularly high, it might mean an important message or a visitor was coming. Some even believed you could see faces or shapes in the flames, much like we see shapes in clouds. Only these fiery apparitions were taken far more seriously. It's a bit like trying to interpret modern art, isn't it? Is that a profound statement, or did someone just spill the paint? Consider the tingle of unease when a candle flame, in a room with no discernible draft, suddenly gutters and almost dies, only to flare up again. It feels purposeful. For our ancestors, this was serious business. The hearth was sacred, a direct link to protector spirits of the home. A misbehaving fire was like a direct message from these entities. Here's a lesser-known belief, particularly in some Celtic traditions. If the first fire lit in a new home refused to draw properly, it was a very bad sign for the occupants' future happiness there. They might even abandon the house. Talk about a fussy housewarming. Imagine the realtor's face. Historians still argue whether the interpretation of fire omens was a codified system with regional consistency or more of a personal, intuitive reading of the moment. Was there a universal fire omen dictionary? Or did Great Aunt Mildred just have a knack for seeing doom in every flicker? Regardless, the reverence for fire and its communicative power was deeply ingrained. It wasn't just heat and light. It was a living entity within the home. Beyond these big three of domestic dread, your home is practically humming with other potential omens, if you know where to look. Or perhaps, if you're just naturally a bit jumpy. Take Take an itchy palm, for example. You're just sitting there, maybe scrolling through endless cat videos, and suddenly your left palm starts to itch. Left to leave, right to receive, goes the old saying. Or sometimes it's the other way around, depending on where you grew up. An itchy left palm often means you're about to pay out money, while an itchy right palm suggests money is coming your way. So, if your left palm is tingling, maybe hold off on that online shopping spree. If it's the right, well, don't quit your day job just yet, but perhaps buy a lottery ticket. It's a very direct, almost transactional kind of superstition. No dramatic soul trapping here, just good old-fashioned cash flow anxieties. Then there's the sudden, unexpected guest. A bird flying into your house. This one is often seen as a rather potent omen, and usually not a good one. Depending on the type of bird and local lore, it could foretell a death in the family, or some other significant, often unwelcome, change. Of course, from the bird's perspective, it's probably just a terrifying experience involving a lot of glass it didn't see. One hopes the omens are not bird-specific. Otherwise, a pigeon flying in might just mean you're about to be mildly annoyed, whereas an eagle would presumably herald something truly epic. Maybe it's just a sign you should clean your windows more often, so they're visible to our feathered friends. And what about those inexplicable sounds? The creaks and groans of an old house settling are one thing. We chalk those up to character, but a picture suddenly falling off the wall for no apparent reason, especially if it's a portrait of Great Uncle Mortimer, who always disapproved of your life choices, that feels a bit more pointed. Some believe this signifies that the person in the picture is in trouble, or perhaps their spirit is restless, or, maybe you just used a cheap nail. But where's the fun in that explanation? Even things like a clock stopping suddenly, especially an old grandfather clock that's been ticking away reliably for generations, can be seen as an omen, often marking the end of an era or foretelling a significant event. It's as if the very rhythm of the home has been disrupted. Like when your smart home assistant starts speaking in a different language, probably just a glitch or perhaps a sign that the AI uprising is beginning. Subtly, with a change in accent, it's these little disruptions to the everyday, the small things going unexpectedly awry, that our minds, ever pattern-seeking, love to imbue with meaning. It makes life a bit more magical, doesn't it? Or at least gives you a good excuse when things go wrong. Oh, I couldn't finish the report. A magpie stole my stapler. It's a terrible omen. You see? So, we've felt the chill from inanimate objects, like those unsettling dolls we encountered, and heard the warnings in the wind, much like those eerie sounds from the corpse roads. But now, you find yourself tuning into a different frequency, a more alive kind of whisper. The animals around you, they're not just background noise, are they? Haha. Oh no. They're the original sentient weather stations, the furry feathered, and sometimes downright grumpy oracles of old. Their every twitch and twitter, a potential headline from the future. Let's start with a classic, the feline enigma, curled up perhaps even now in a patch of moonlight on your floor. You see a black cat, sleek and mysterious, its eyes like polished amber as it glides across your path. For many, especially after the Middle Ages in Europe, that's an instant jolt of, oh, a little prickle of unease. The poor things got unfairly lumped in with witches, becoming symbols of bad luck or demonic familiars, their silent paws supposedly treading paths between worlds. It's a prime example of how a simple creature can be saddled with centuries of superstitious baggage. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you: the demonization of black cats during the witch hunts, particularly in 16th and 17th century Europe, led to their widespread killing. Some historians suggest this, ironically, might have worsened plague outbreaks by reducing the cat population that kept the rat numbers in check. A real, whoops, our bad moment for humanity there, wouldn't you say? But then, you notice your own tabby, not even a black one, meticulously, almost religiously, washing behind its ears. An old wives' tale. You might chuckle, but a tiny part of you, a part that remembers whispered stories from childhood, recalls hearing that it's a sure sign of rain. It's almost as if they have tiny invisible barometers embedded in their whiskers, or perhaps they just really dislike having damp ears. And sneezing a single, delicate sneeze. From a cat in some places, that was considered good luck, a little fluffy blessing, but a cat sneezing 3 times in a row. Oh, honey, you were practically guaranteed to catch a cold yourself. Maybe the cat was just allergic to your potpourri, or perhaps it was trying to expel a tiny, judgmental spirit. Hard to say with cats, isn't it? They keep their secrets well, those little sphinxes. And then there are the birds. Their messages are carried on the wind, sometimes literally. Their feathers like quills transcribing fate. You hear the sharp, chattering call of a magpie. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy. The old rhyme echoes in your mind, soft and insistent. You might find yourself craning your neck, scanning the trees, desperately hoping for a second one to appear. Because who really needs extra sorrow these days? We've got enough angsty dramas on streaming services for that. Crows and ravens, with their glossy black feathers that shimmer with an almost oily intelligence, and their knowing eyes, often get a bad rap. They're frequently associated with death, battlefields, and things best left undisturbed. Thanks, Odin. Thanks, Edgar Allan Poe. Yet in other traditions, these same birds are symbols of profound wisdom, potent magic, even creation itself. It's all about context, isn't it? Like that one friend who's either deeply insightful or just really, really strange, depending entirely on the day and how much coffee they've had. A particularly unsettling omen, one that makes the air feel suddenly thin and cold, is a bird flying into your house. You can almost feel the collective, sharp intake of breath from generations past. It's often seen as a message of impending death for someone in the household, or at the very least, a significant, often unwelcome, change barreling your way. The frantic, papery flutter of its wings, the desperate way it bangs against the window pane, a tiny, feathered prisoner seeking escape. It's a distressing sight, easily interpreted as a soul trying to depart or a harbinger bringing grim, unavoidable news. Robins, usually such cheerful, vibrant little things, persistently tapping at your window. That's another one that sends a shiver down the spine for some, a gentle but insistent warning. Like a polite but firm memo from the other side. Owls, too, with their silent, ghostly flight and their nocturnal calls. That soft hoo-hoo drifting through the night air. It could be a call from the spirit world, a feathered psychopomp, or, just an owl being an owl, probably wondering if you're going to finish that sandwich. It's a bit like getting a cryptic text message at 3 a.m. Your brain immediately races to the most dramatic and usually least plausible interpretation. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. The Romans were obsessed with bird divination. They employed official augurs who would interpret flight patterns, songs, and even the eating habits of birds to guide state decisions. Imagine postponing a crucial Senate vote because a chicken wasn't feeling particularly peckish that morning. Sorry, Caesar. The sacred chickens aren't vibing with this new tax bill today. These pulli sacri, or sacred chickens, had their own attendants, and their refusal to eat before a battle was considered a terrible omen. The consul Publius Claudius Pulcher, back in 249 BC, famously grew impatient when the sacred chickens refused to eat before a naval battle. He reportedly had them thrown overboard, exclaiming, "If they will not eat, let them drink." He then promptly lost the battle. Coincidence? Perhaps, or perhaps, just perhaps, don't tick off the divine poultry. Let's not forget our supposed best friends, dogs. Loyal, yes, and endearingly goofy, but also, according to a vast tapestry of folklore, incredibly sensitive to the unseen, the ethereal. You hear a dog howling in the distance, that long, mournful sound that seems to vibrate right through your bones, making the very air heavy. Not just any howl, but one that seems to carry a particular desolate sorrow. For centuries, this has been interpreted as a premonition of death, as if the dog is keening for a soul about to depart or one already on its shadowy journey. It's widely believed they can see spirits, or at least sense presences that we, in our mundane, screen-lit reality, completely miss. Remember how we talked about certain places just feeling wrong? Like that old, abandoned churchyard dogs might be picking up on that on a whole other, more primal level. You might see your own dog, usually so placid and happy to chase its tail, suddenly freeze, staring intently at an empty corner of the room, hackles slightly raised, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest. What does it see? You can't perceive anything, just dust motes dancing in a stray sunbeam. But the dog's reaction is undeniably real, undeniably unsettling. It's enough to make you glance over your shoulder, just in case, a new, unwelcome awareness settling in. Or what about a dog digging holes in the yard for no apparent reason? Not just playful digging, but a focused, almost obsessive excavation, as if searching for something specific or preparing for something. In some traditions, this was seen as the dog digging a symbolic kiv referred, another quiet, unsettling omen whispered on the breeze. It's like they have a sixth sense for the Grim Reaper's itinerary. And frankly, I'd rather they kept that particular information to themselves and just stuck to fetching sticks. Finally, we wander out to the fields, or at least, imagine we do. The scent of damp earth and hay filling your senses. Livestock, so crucial for survival throughout history, were also keen barometers of fortune and the elements. You hear cattle lowing in a strange, distressed way, not their usual contented, cud-chewing sounds. Or you see sheep, normally scattered across the pasture like fluffy white clouds, suddenly huddling together tightly, anxious and still, even on a calm, sunny day. Farmers, whose lives depended on the land and its creatures, learned to watch these signs with a keen eye. Unusual restlessness in the herd, a stubborn refusal to go into their barns at dusk, or a sudden, inexplicable panic rippling through the animals could foretell a coming storm, an earthquake, or sometimes a more personal misfortune for the community, like illness or loss. Even chickens weren't exempt from this prophetic role. A hen crowing like a rooster. Oh, that was considered deeply unlucky, a sign that the natural order was out of whack. Chickens making unusual, agitated noises or refusing to roost at night, all were seen as signs that something was amiss in the natural, or indeed, the supernatural, order. It's like the entire farm becomes a chorus of anxiety, each creature adding its own note of foreboding. Historians still argue whether these intricate systems of animal-based omens were primarily early rudimentary attempts to understand and predict natural phenomena like weather changes, earthquakes, and the movements of prey, or if they served more complex sociocultural functions, perhaps as a way to manage collective anxiety, reinforce communal beliefs, or even to exert social control in a world that often felt overwhelmingly full of uncertainties. It's a fascinating intersection of practical, sharp-eyed observation and profound, deeply ingrained superstition. These weren't just random beliefs pulled from thin air. They were often based on generations of noticing subtle animal behaviors that reliably preceded certain events. The trick, of course, is separating the genuine early warning system from the slightly more dramatic, human-imposed interpretations. After all, sometimes a howling dog is just lonely, and sometimes a crow is just, being a crow, probably judging your fashion sense from afar with that intelligent, unblinking gaze. And so, as you drift from those unseen forces we were just whispering about, those feelings and forebodings that seem to cling to the air itself, you find your attention drawn downwards to the solid, tangible world beneath your feet. Because sometimes, power isn't just a shiver down your spine or a shadow in the corner of your eye. Sometimes, it's something you can hold in your hand, something you stumble upon, quite literally, a power found in objects. You're walking, perhaps through a field, or maybe, less romantically, across a muddy track after a music festival. Your foot catches on something. You look down, expecting a rock or a discarded... Well, let's not dwell on what gets discarded at festivals. But no, it's a horseshoe. Rusted, perhaps caked with a bit of earth, but unmistakably a horseshoe. And a little thrill goes through you, doesn't it? That old ingrained superstition whispers. Luck. The humble horseshoe. A classic if ever there was one. You've seen them nailed above doorways. Sometimes points up, sometimes points down. Points up, they say, to keep the luck from spilling out, like a little metal cup of good fortune. Points down, and the luck is meant to shower down on anyone who passes underneath. You pick your poison, or rather, your preferred direction of fortunate flow. The tradition of nailing horseshoes above doors for protection is incredibly widespread. One of the most enduring historical explanations links this to Saint Dunstan, a 10th century English saint who was also a blacksmith. Legend has it, he cleverly shooed the devil, causing him such pain that the devil promised never to enter a house protected by a horseshoe. A rather effective bit of spiritual home security, if you ask me. But the rituals can get even more specific. Some believe a found horseshoe is only truly lucky if it was cast from a gray mare, or if it still has some of the original nails in it. The more nails, the better the luck. Apparently, it's like a little lottery scratcher, but made of iron and significantly harder to carry in your wallet. And then there's the debate about whether you should pick up any horseshoe you find, or only one that's lying with the open end pointing towards you. It's almost as if the universe is playing a little game of fetch, and you have to follow the rules precisely. Imagine explaining to your boss you're late because you were trying to determine the correct orientation of a discarded equine accessory on the M25. Probably wouldn't fly. Then you shift your gaze from the robust iron to something far more delicate. You're in that same field, perhaps, and you find yourself idly scanning the clover patch. We've all done it. That almost meditative search for the elusive anomaly. The four-leaf clover. Each leaf, they say, represents something: faith, hope, love. And the fourth, of course, is luck. Finding one is like nature winking at you. A tiny green secret just for you. The sheer rarity contributes to its mystique. Statistically, you're looking at about a 1 in 10,000 chance. No wonder finding one feels like you've hit the jackpot. The ancient Druids, those enigmatic figures we touched upon earlier with their sacred groves, are often said to have revered four-leaf clovers, believing they offered protection against evil spirits and granted the power to see fairies. Whether this is entirely accurate or a later romantic embellishment, well, historians still argue whether the specific veneration of the four-leaf clover by Druids is well documented, or more of a folkloric accretion over centuries. The three-leaf shamrock, of course, has strong connections to St. Patrick and Irish identity. But the four-leaf variant carries its own distinct, more universally lucky charm. The ritual here is often simpler, but no less potent. You find it, you gasp internally, or out loud. No judgment here. And then you carefully press it between the pages of a book or tuck it into your wallet. It becomes a personal talisman. Some say its luck is diminished if you show it to others too readily, that its power is for you alone, cultivated in secrecy. I once spent an entire summer holiday as a child meticulously searching for one. My reward, a spectacular collection of very ordinary three-leaf clovers and a rather persistent grass stain on my favorite shorts. Still waiting for that botanical lottery win. And then there are the stones, not just any stones, but specific stones. You're walking along a beach, the waves are sighing, and your eye is caught by a pebble, perfectly smooth, or with a unique band of color, or perhaps a natural hole worn right through it. This, your intuition tells you, is a lucky stone. The belief in the power of stones is ancient, deeply ingrained. Think of amulets and talismans from cultures worldwide. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, were renowned for their use of stones like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise in their jewelry and funerary rites, believing these stones offered protection, power, and a connection to the divine. You can almost feel that ancient weight, that history, when you hold a piece of polished lapis today. A particularly fascinating and quirky tidbit is the lore surrounding hagstones, or adder stones, stones with a naturally occurring hole through them. These were, and in some places still are, considered powerful protectors against witches, nightmares, and evil spirits. People would hang them in their homes, in stables to protect livestock, or even wear them around their necks. The idea was that malevolent magic couldn't pass through the hole, or that looking through the hole allowed you to see into the fairy realm or detect disguised spirits. It's a very specific kind of luck, more about warding off the bad than attracting the good, like a tiny geological bouncer for your aura. Today, you see echoes of this in the popularity of crystals: rose quartz for love, amethyst for calm, citrine for abundance. People charge them under the full moon, carry them in their pockets, meditate with them. It's a modern iteration of that ancient human impulse to find power and meaning in the beautiful, silent things the earth offers up. The rituals here can be quite elaborate: cleansing with smoke, sound baths, arranging them in specific grids. It's a far cry from just finding a cool rock, but the root desire, that connection to something tangible and potent, feels very much the same. You might even argue that the current wellness trend of using crystals is just a highly marketed version of what our ancestors did instinctively. Perhaps they didn't have Instagram to show off their crystal grids, but the feeling of holding a special stone, one that feels right, is timeless. The act of finding. These objects often seems key. A horseshoe bought from a shop might be a lovely rustic decoration, but does it have the same charge as one stumbled upon a four-leaf clover cultivated in a lab might be a botanical marvel? But does it whisper the same secrets as one discovered unexpectedly in a wild patch? There's a sense that these objects are gifts from fate, little nudges from the universe, and the rituals surrounding them. Whether it's the precise orientation of a horseshoe or the quiet veneration of a found stone, are our way of acknowledging that gift, of trying to harness that little spark of perceived power. It's a very personal magic, this belief in found power, tailored to the object and the finder, a quiet contract between you and the serendipity of the world. It's all about that moment of discovery, that little zing of, ooh, this is special. even if, objectively, it's just a bit of old metal, a mutated plant, or a common pebble. But then again, who are we to argue with centuries of hopeful humans? So, after all that talk about cosmic influences and divination, like those scrying mirrors we peeked into earlier, you might start to feel a little powerless, as if your fate is entirely written in the stars, or in the dregs of a teacup. But humans, ever the optimists, or perhaps just delightful control enthusiasts, have always sought ways to nudge luck in their favor, to carry a little bit of good fortune right there in their pocket, or perhaps elegantly draped around their neck. You decide it's time to take matters into your own hands, or at least accessorize them appropriately for auspicious outcomes. You find yourself drawn to the idea of personal talismans, those intimate guardians against the whims of fate. These aren't typically grand theatrical rituals, not usually. They're the small personal superstitions, the little comforts that whisper reassurance. You picture ancient hands, perhaps calloused from the toil of the fields or the grip of a sword, clutching a smooth, worn stone, a meticulously carved piece of bone, or a single glimmering gem found glinting in a riverbed. These objects, these amulets and charms, are so much more than just trinkets. They are concentrated hope, physical manifestations of a deeply human desire for protection, for prosperity, for just a little bit of an edge in a world that often feels overwhelmingly, and sometimes beautifully, random. You can almost feel the imagined weight of such a charm in your palm now, cool and solid and reassuring. Think about the sheer, delightful variety that human ingenuity has conjured up. The Egyptian Ankh, that potent symbol of life itself, often carried or worn for vitality and the promise of divine protection. That's a pretty mainstream historical fact. Seeing as they pop up everywhere from the dusty interiors of ancient tombs to the brightly lit shelves of modern tourist shops, or consider a simple four-leaf clover. Its rare symmetry, a promise of good things, pressed carefully between the pages of a book or encased in a tiny locket. Maybe it's a rabbit's foot. Though, let's be honest, that whole arrangement wasn't so lucky for the rabbit. Was it? That's one of those little observations that just hops into your mind. You might even have a lucky penny you once stooped to pick up. Heads up, of course, because details matter in the business of luck. It's that tangible link, that comforting feeling that this specific chosen item is somehow watching out for you. A silent, pocket-sized bodyguard. You run an imaginary thumb over its unique, cherished surface. And then there are the charms you wear directly against your skin, nestled close, sharing your warmth. You feel the faint coolness of a silver chain, perhaps from which dangles a tiny charm, maybe one you've had since childhood. Its original gleam now softened to a gentle glow. It could be a Saint Christopher medal, its worn surface a testament to countless journeys, real or ardently hoped for, a miniature map of protection, or perhaps it's a Hamsa hand, intricate and ever watchful with its central eye, designed to push away that unseen negativity, that evil eye we've touched upon before. Sometimes, though, it's less about ancient symbols and far more about profound personal connection. A locket, perhaps heart-shaped, or a classic oval, containing a miniature, slightly faded photograph of a loved one, their familiar smile a silent, constant blessing against your skin. This is a modern charm, in its own potent way, a tiny, wearable fortress of affection. These items become extensions of yourself, not just mundane accessories, but loyal companions. They absorb the subtle warmth of your body, the rhythmic beat of your pulse, becoming imbued with your personal energy alongside the collective belief of countless generations. You might adjust an imaginary bracelet now, feeling the gentle, almost musical clinking of tiny, protective symbols, each one a soft whisper of, "You're safe, you're lucky." Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of certain charm motifs, like the scarab beetle in ancient Egypt, signifying rebirth and protection, was due to genuine, deeply felt belief in their specific protective efficacy, or simply because they became incredibly popular fashion trends, spreading rapidly like wildfire through bustling ancient trade routes. It's probably, as with many things, a delightful bit of both, isn't it? Like those live, laugh, love signs that were everywhere a while back, but with a few thousand more years of perceived magical oomph and considerably less splintery pine wood. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you, something to ponder as the shadows lengthen in some old European traditions, particularly in parts of Britain. Carrying a holy stone, that is, a stone with a naturally occurring hole worn through it by water or wind, was believed to offer potent protection from witches or general ill luck. Even more charmingly, it was said that if you peered through the hole, you might be granted a glimpse of the fairy world. Imagine children on a windswept moor, earnestly squinting through these small perforated pebbles, searching for a shimmer of the unseen, a flutter of iridescent wings. You can almost hear their delighted, hushed gasps. Today, you don't see too many people searching for fairy vision stones, but you might see people wearing crystal pendants for their purported healing energies, or cherishing a specific piece of jewelry they never take off because it's their lucky necklace, the one they wore when they aced that impossible exam or had that serendipitous meeting with someone special. It's the same ancient principle, really, just dressed in slightly more contemporary clothes. Your phone case, with that one specific, slightly peeling sticker, could even be a contender for modern amulet status if you think about it hard enough and assign it enough positive memories. But carrying luck, you realize, isn't just about accumulating positive tokens and hopeful symbols. It's also about deftly sidestepping the cosmic banana peels that life occasionally strews in your path. You approach a ladder leaned casually against a wall, forming that unmistakable triangular shape. That familiar, almost instinctual prickle of hesitation. Do you walk under it? It's just a ladder. Your rational mind scoffs with a touch of modern superiority. But a deeper, older part of you, the part that enjoys a good spooky story late at night, whispers. Why risk it is the shortcut, 100%, really worth tempting fate. The superstition about walking under a ladder is often linked to the Christian concept of the Holy Trinity. A ladder against a wall forms a triangle, and walking through it was seen by some as disrespecting or symbolically breaking this sacred shape. Others suggest it's because you might disturb spirits or unseen entities thought to reside within that triangular space. Or, on a more practical note, someone might drop a heavy paint can directly onto your head. Practicality sometimes does an excellent job of dressing up as superstition, doesn't it? You catch your reflection in a passing shop window, smooth and unbroken. Oh, the sheer, heart-stopping horror of a broken mirror. 7 years bad luck, they say, a doom-laden pronouncement that echoes through generations. This rather dramatic belief likely stems from the ancient idea that a mirror didn't just reflect your image, but somehow held a fragment of your soul. Breaking it was therefore akin to damaging your very essence, inviting misfortune. A bit theatrical, perhaps, but it certainly makes you handle your bathroom mirror with a certain reverence. And then there's the seemingly innocuous act of spilling salt, a common condiment, a culinary essential. Yet its accidental scattering can send a shiver down superstitious spines. The traditional remedy, tossing a pinch of the spilled salt over your left shoulder, supposedly to blind the devil or any mischievous evil spirits lurking there, just waiting for an opportunity to cause trouble. You can almost feel the fine grains of salt between your fingers, ready for that quick, defensive flick. Imagine the delightful chaos at a particularly clumsy dinner party. Oops. Terribly sorry, darling. Just blinding Satan. Again, more bread. It's fascinating, isn't it? How these little rituals, these collections of do's and don'ts, give us such a profound, if sometimes illusory, sense of agency. You feel a small, yet significant, measure of control in a world that, as we've discussed in hushed tones before, can feel wildly, beautifully, terrifyingly unpredictable. Whether it's clutching that smooth worrystone in your pocket until its edges are softened and uniquely contoured by your anxieties, or meticulously, almost comically, sidestepping around every single crack in the pavement, because stepping on a crack breaks your mother's back. Obviously, a childhood chant that still echoes with surprising persistence in the back of your mind for some of us. These actions are deeply human. They are the subtle, often unspoken, whispers of ancient fears and primordial hopes carried like precious, fragile heirlooms into our modern lives. Often, you perform them with a wry, self-aware smile and a just-in-case shrug to an invisible audience, acknowledging the slight absurdity while still finding a sliver of genuine comfort. It's like a quiet wink to the universe, hoping it winks back with favor. You realize, as you ponder these things, that your own personal fortune isn't necessarily about ancient artifacts dug from the earth or strictly prescribed avoidances anymore. Though those traditions certainly linger with a certain nostalgic charm, it's also, perhaps even more so, about the things you personally imbue with significance, the objects that have become lucky through association and experience. That slightly battered concert ticket from the best night of your life, tucked carefully into your wallet, a paper memory of pure joy. The specific pen you always use for important documents, the one that feels right in your hand. Your lucky socks. Don't pretend you don't have a pair, or at least a lucky t-shirt, reserved for days when you need that extra boost. These modern amulets might not have centuries of established lore behind them, but they carry your personal history, your own small pockets of accumulated magic and concentrated good feeling. You gently pat your pocket, where perhaps one such unassuming item resides, a silent, personal source of strength. So, you carry these tokens, you sidestep those ladders, you engage in these little, almost unconscious dances with fate. It's a quiet acknowledgement that while grand destinies might indeed unfold according to some vast, unknowable plan, the day-to-day journey can be sweetened, or at least feel a little safer, a little more manageable, with a charm in hand or a cautious, well-considered step. It's a very personal, very human way to navigate the uncertainties we've been exploring together in the dim light. And speaking of navigation, sometimes you don't just carry luck or avoid misfortune. Sometimes you actively try to find it, seeking out places or practices that promise a brighter, more fortunate tomorrow. But that's a thought for another quiet moment, another gentle unfolding. For now, you just appreciate the comforting, imagined weight of that lucky charm, feeling just a bit more prepared for whatever comes next on our journey. You drift now, not through moonlit graveyards or forgotten crypts, but into the quiet, simmering hum of daily life in a place where everyone knows your name, and perhaps your grandmother's secret recipe for warding off bad luck. It's here, in these close-knit communities, much like the ones we've glimpsed before, nestled in valleys or perched on windswept coasts, that the unseen world presses in most insistently. You feel it sometimes, don't you? That prickle on the back of your neck, that sudden, inexplicable chill when someone's gaze lingers just a fraction of a second too long. Tonight, we're looking directly into that gaze, the one that's whispered to carry more than just idle curiosity. We're talking about the evil eye, or as some might call it, the malocchio, Ayanhara, or a dozen other names depending on where your well-worn boots happen to tread. It's a wonderfully human superstition. This idea that a look laden with envy, or sometimes even just excessive, unthinking admiration, can bring misfortune. You know the feeling. Perhaps when your neighbor, dear old Agnes, comments a little too enthusiastically on how surprisingly well your struggling tomato plants are doing this year. And then, the next day, blight. Coincidence. Agnes would probably offer you a sympathetic casserole, while privately wondering if she should have knocked on wood. This isn't some newfangled notion cooked up to explain why your Wi-Fi drops during important Zoom calls. The belief in the evil eye is ancient, truly ancient. You find it across cultures, stretching back into classical antiquity. The ancient Greeks and Romans were firm believers. They carved apotropaic symbols, those intended to ward off evil, onto everything from drinking vessels to the prows of their ships, hoping to deflect any envious stares that might come their way. So, when you're sipping your artisanal coffee from a mug with a vaguely protective-looking geometric pattern, you're partaking in a tradition thousands of years old. You're practically an ancient Roman, just with better plumbing and the ways people have tried to protect themselves. Oh, the ingenuity is delightful. It's not just about muttering a quick prayer or spitting discreetly. Yes, that was a thing. There are amulets galore. The most famous misappropriation, perhaps, is the Nazar Obendamt, that striking blue and white glass bead, shaped like an eye itself, designed to stare right back at any malevolent glance. Then there's the Mano Cornuta, the horned hand gesture, which you might have seen at a rock concert. But its origins are far older, meant to poke the bad luck right in its, well, eye. One quirky little tidbit is the practice in some cultures of intentionally finding a small flaw in something beautiful or new, a tiny chip in a new pot, a misstitch in a new garment, just to sort of preemptively satisfy any lurking envy, as if to say, see, it's not that perfect. Nothing to get jealous about here. It's like deliberately posting a slightly blurry selfie. Strategic imperfection. But it's not just the unspoken power of a look. Words, too, in these tightly woven social tapestries, are believed to carry immense weight. Think about curses. We tend to imagine dramatic, theatrical pronouncements, maybe involving a cauldron and some eye of newt. But in the everyday context of a small village, a curse could be far more subtle. A venomous whisper, a string of ill wishes muttered under someone's breath after a disagreement over a wandering goat or a shared well. You feel the weight of those words, especially when they come from someone you see every day, someone whose family has lived next to yours for generations. A sudden illness, a failed crop, a prize-winning chicken that inexplicably keels over. Could it be the result of that argument you had with Old Man Fitzwilliam about the precise location of the property line? The mind, especially a mind steeped in these traditions, readily connects the dots. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of evil eye beliefs and the fear of curses primarily served as a social leveling mechanism, discouraging ostentatious displays of wealth or success that might breed envy, or if they were genuine attempts to explain the inexplicable misfortunes that pepper human existence. Perhaps it's a bit of both. It's a way to make sense of a world that often feels random and unfair, and also a handy way to keep young Barnaby from boasting too much about his suspiciously large turnips. And just as words can harm, they can also heal, or at least protect. Spoken blessings are the counter magic, the soothing balm to the imagined sting of a curse or an envious stare, a heartfelt God bless you, or a more specific traditional blessing for a new home, a newborn child, or even a newly planted field, is seen as a shield. It's an invocation of positive energy, a communal affirmation of goodwill. You might see someone making a particular sign or touching a specific object while delivering a blessing, adding a physical component to the verbal power. It's like when your friend says, "break a leg" before a performance, a strangely phrased good luck charm, but the intent is there. Imagine the village elder, her voice raspy with age, but firm with conviction, laying a hand on a young couple's shoulders and wishing them prosperity. There's a palpable sense of comfort, of spiritual reinforcement, in that moment. In these close-knit communities, where privacy is a rare commodity and reputations are meticulously maintained, these beliefs are more than just quaint folklore. They are active social forces. The fear of being the subject of an ill wish, or of inadvertently casting the evil eye yourself, subtly shapes behavior. You learn to be modest in your successes, generous in your good fortune, and careful with your words, especially in anger. You try not to stare too long at your neighbor's newly repaired fence, the one that's so much straighter than yours, lest it inexplicably develop a sudden lean. It's a delicate dance of superstition and social etiquette, played out in the glances exchanged over shared cups of tea in the market square and across the low stone walls that separate one life from another. These aren't just beliefs about unseen forces. They are the very threads that help bind the community together, for better or for worse, dictating how you interact, how you share, and how you guard your heart and your prize-winning goat from the gaze that harms. You feel it now, don't you? A certain heaviness in the air as we tread this particular stretch of the path. It's the weight of countless goodbyes, the lingering whispers of those who've passed. Tonight, we're tiptoeing through the shadowy world of spirits, superstitions, and the elaborate, sometimes frankly baffling, lengths people have gone to ensure the dead stay, well, dead. Or at least, respectfully departed and not popping back for a midnight snack or to rearrange the furniture. It's a delicate balance. This dance with the departed, a choreography learned over millennia. It often starts with a sign, a little nudge from the universe that someone's celestial subscription is about to expire. You might see a lone bird, perhaps a magpie, a raven, or an owl tapping at a window. Not just any tap, mind you, but a specific, portentous rhythm that just feels different, resonating deep in your bones. Or maybe it's a dog howling inconsolably at nothing visible, its mournful cries echoing through the stillness, a sound that bypasses your ears and goes straight to your heart. Your ancestors wouldn't just dismiss this as the neighbor's poorly trained hound, or a common crow looking for a crumb. Oh no, this was serious business. This was the universe sending a push notification, old school style, delivered with a chilling gravity that no vibrating phone could ever replicate. Dreams, too, played their part. A dream of falling teeth, of muddy water, or a visit from a long-lost relative bearing solemn news. These weren't just random synaptic firings. They were messages from the liminal space, whispers from the veil. You'd wake with a sense of unease, a premonition settling like dust on your soul. And once the inevitable happens, once a breath is drawn for the last time, the real spiritual housekeeping begins. It's not enough to simply grieve. You have to manage the transition, for everyone's sake. You'd carefully close the eyes of the deceased, a gesture of peace. Yes, but also, in many traditions, to prevent their spirit from looking back, from finding a way to tether itself to this world with a final, longing gaze. Mirrors, those reflective portals, would be covered, draped in cloth. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of covering mirrors after a death was primarily a practical measure to avoid unsettling reflections of the mourners themselves during a vulnerable time, or a deeply rooted spiritual precaution against the spirit becoming trapped, or using the mirror as an accidental gateway back. Imagine catching a glimpse of a recently departed soul trying to figure out its new translucent reflection. Talk about an awkward family moment. The body itself would be handled with immense care, washed and dressed, often in new or fine clothes, preparing it for its final journey. The orientation of the body in the grave, the direction it faced, could be critical. Towards the rising sun, perhaps, or towards the ancestral homeland. These weren't arbitrary choices. They were imbued with meaning, designed to aid the spirit's passage. Consider the Victorians, a culture practically obsessed with the aesthetics and rituals of death. We've touched on their elaborate mourning customs before, haven't we? They developed intricate protocols with specific colors of clothing worn for set periods, sometimes lasting for years. You'd see mourning jewelry, often incredibly detailed pieces woven from the hair of the deceased, lockets, brooches, rings. It was a way to keep a part of their loved one physically close, a tangible connection to the spirit that had departed, a memento mori that was both deeply personal and a public declaration of grief. It's a far cry from a commemorative Facebook post, though perhaps serving a similar human need for remembrance and connection. And then there are the more, shall we say, proactive measures to ensure a spirit didn't linger in unwelcome ways. If you were really worried about, say, a particularly cantankerous individual coming back to complain about the eulogy or the division of their worldly goods, you might employ certain burial techniques. Some cultures practiced burying individuals face down, the rather grim idea being that if they tried to dig their way out, they'd only dig themselves deeper into the earth. Or perhaps you'd hear tales of bodies being interred with specific items, not just for use in the afterlife, but to weigh them down, to keep them put. And let's not forget the delightful, if slightly morbid, innovation of the safety coffin in the 18th and 19th centuries. These contraptions came complete with bells, flags, and sometimes even breathing tubes, all designed to alert the living if, heaven forbid, someone was mistakenly declared dead and buried alive. Imagine the relief, or perhaps the profound annoyance, of the cemetery watchman hearing that little ting-a-ling after a long quiet night. Oh, for goodness sake, not another one. Better fetch the shovel, and maybe a stiff drink. The goal, more often than not, wasn't to trap or harm the spirit, but to guide it gently, yet firmly, towards whatever came next. You'd leave out food and drink, spirit plates, as they're sometimes called, not because spirits get peckish in the traditional sense, but as an offering, a show of continued care and respect that encourages them to move on peacefully. It's like leaving a 5-star Yelp review for their journey to the great beyond, excellent service, smooth transition, would die again. Well, maybe not that last part. Certain paths around the home might be symbolically swept clear after the body was removed, or doors and windows left open for a specific period to allow the spirit an easy exit. No one wants a confused ghost bumping into walls, trying to find the spiritual equivalent of the emergency exit, getting increasingly frustrated and potentially a bit mischievous. But what if they did linger? Beliefs varied wildly, as they always do. Some spirits were seen as benevolent protectors, ancestral guardians watching over the family from just beyond the veil. Others, perhaps those who died unjustly, with unfinished business, or in great distress, could be restless, even troublesome. You might hear unexplained noises, footsteps in an empty hallway, a soft whisper when no one is there. You might feel sudden cold spots, that classic ghostly calling card. Remember that chilly draft we felt by the old, ruined chapel a while back? Perhaps it wasn't just the wind funneling through the broken stones. And if a spirit was really determined to stick around despite your best efforts at spectral eviction, despite the offerings, the open windows, and the heartfelt pleas, well, that's when you'd call in the specialists, the village elder, the wise woman, the shaman, the priest, the ancient equivalent of a paranormal investigator. Probably with fewer electronic gadgets and a lot more chanting, incense, or sacred herbs. Look, spirit, you can almost hear them saying, with a sigh. We've tried the gentle approach. We've offered snacks. We even played your favorite dirge on the village lute. It's time to go. Don't make us recaulk the spiritual windows and change the ethereal locks. The methods for placating or banishing a truly stubborn spirit could range from complex rituals and elaborate ceremonies to simple, heartfelt prayers for their peace. Think back to some of the ancient tombs we've explored in our minds, like those megalithic structures we pictured earlier in our journey, those silent stone sentinels. The sheer effort involved in their construction, the quarrying and transport of massive stones, speaks volumes about the importance placed on the dead and their spirits. The precise alignment with celestial events, like the solstice sun we imagined illuminating a hidden chamber, the grave goods buried within. These weren't just casual afterthoughts. They were integral to ensuring the spirit's successful passage, and, by extension, the well-being of the living community. If the spirits were content and well cared for, the belief went, then the harvest would be bountiful, the hunts successful, and the community would prosper. If they were disgruntled, well, you really didn't want to find out what happened then. So, as you continue to walk this path with me, notice the way the shadows play among the trees, the way the wind sometimes seems to whisper secrets through the leaves. Every culture, every era, has woven its own intricate tapestry of belief and superstition around death. It's a testament to our enduring human fascination with what lies beyond that final breath, and our very deep-seated need to make sense of the ultimate unknown. It's a complex, often poignant, dance of fear, respect, love, and a profound desire for cosmic order, ensuring that the delicate boundary between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead remains, more or less, respectfully intact. My brother. And so, as the fire dies down, as the shadows lengthen just a little bit more, you find yourself wondering, why did these beliefs, these curious rituals and whispered warnings, hold such sway for so long? Why did they nestle so deeply into the human heart? Like those persistent little dust bunnies under the bed that you swear you just vacuumed. It wasn't just because people were, less smart back then. That's a rather smug modern take, isn't it? No, the truth, as always, is far more practical and deeply human. You see, in a world where the next harvest, the next illness, the next storm felt entirely out of your hands, these superstitions were not just fanciful tales. They were tools. Imagine trying to build a complex piece of IKEA furniture, but the instructions are only in ancient Aramaic, and half the pages are missing. That's kind of what understanding the world was like, without the scientific method firmly in place. So, you grab onto anything that seems to offer a hint, a pattern, a cause and effect. Remember all those charms and amulets we talked about, the ones meant to ward off the evil eye or ensure a safe journey. In the absence of, say, reliable travel insurance or advanced medical diagnostics, they offered a tangible sense of agency. If you did the right things, said the right words, wore the right, slightly smelly pouch of herbs, maybe, just maybe, things would turn out okay. It's the original life hack, just with more at stake than a perfectly peeled avocado. This practicality blossomed in the fertile ground of the unknown before the Enlightenment really began to champion reason and empirical evidence in the 18th century, and slowly, ever so slowly, started to illuminate the darker corners of ignorance. What else did you have? You have your senses, your community, and the stories passed down. If old Aunt Agnes swore that planting beans by the light of a specific moon phase, like we touched upon earlier with agricultural rhythms, yielded a better crop, and her beans were pretty good, well, who were you to argue with generations of bean-related success? It provided a framework. If X, then Y. If you spill the salt, you throw some over your shoulder to avert bad luck. It doesn't scientifically do anything to the abstract concept of luck, but it gives you an action to perform, a sense of having addressed the potential problem. It's far more comforting than just shrugging and waiting for the universe to decide your fate, possibly with a sudden piano falling from the sky. And comfort. Oh, comfort was a huge part of it. Think about the fear, the genuine, bone-deep fear of the dark, of sudden illness, of death, of the unknown forces that seemed to buffet human existence. Superstitions were like a warm, albeit sometimes scratchy, blanket. They provided explanations, however mystical, for why bad things happened. It wasn't just random cruelty. It was a displeased spirit, a broken taboo, a witch's curse, and if there was a cause, well, perhaps there was a remedy, a counter-ritual, a way to appease. Consider the rather grim but fascinating role of the Sin Eater, a lesser-known figure in parts of Britain. This person would ritually consume bread and ale passed over a deceased body, symbolically taking on the sins of the departed, allowing their soul to pass peacefully. It's a macabre thought, certainly, but imagine the immense comfort it brought to a grieving family, the assurance that their loved one was free. The Sin Eater, often an outcast themselves, performed a vital, communal service, absorbing the spiritual anxieties of others. This leads us directly to social cohesion. Shared beliefs, even if they're about how to properly dispose of nail clippings to avoid being cursed, a surprisingly common concern. As we've seen, bind people together. You all know the rules. You all participate in the rituals. You all share the same anxieties and the same reassurances. It creates an us. It reinforces community bonds. When everyone in the village avoids that one particular path through the woods after dark, or performs the same gestures for luck before a hunt, it creates a silent, shared understanding, a collective identity. Breaking these unwritten rules didn't just invite personal misfortune. It could be seen as endangering the entire group. This pressure to conform, while sometimes stifling, also ensured that collective wisdom, or what passed for it, was maintained. It's a bit like everyone agreeing on which side of the road to drive on, even if the initial reason is lost to time. The shared adherence keeps things running, more or less smoothly. Historians still argue whether the elaborate systems of belief, particularly concerning magic or witchcraft, were genuinely held with uniform fervor by all members of society, or if there was a significant degree of social performance involved. Did everyone truly believe that Goody Miller's sour milk was the result of witchcraft? Or was it sometimes a convenient explanation, a way to channel social tensions or explain away personal failures? It's likely a complex mix, but the framework itself, the accepted narrative, was powerful. It provided a script for understanding misfortune and for taking action, even if that action was pointing a finger. Ultimately, these beliefs endured because they worked. Not in a scientifically verifiable way, but in a human, psychological, and social way. They offered a semblance of control in a chaotic world. They provided explanations where there were none readily available. They soothed fears, validated emotions, and strengthened the ties that bound communities together. They were the original operating system for the human mind when faced with the overwhelming complexity of existence, long before we had the updates and patches of modern science. They gave a narrative to the random, a reason to the inexplicable, and a ritual to the emotional. And even now, with all our knowledge, don't you sometimes find yourself knocking on wood, just in case? Yeah, me too. So now, as our journey through these shadowed paths of belief and superstition draws to its gentle close for tonight, allow yourself to feel the weight of those ancient understandings, the echoes of those old fears and comforts. The world they navigated was one of profound mystery, where every rustle in the leaves, every unexpected event, could hold deep significance, a message from an unseen world. These beliefs were their maps, their guides, their ways of making sense of it all, of finding patterns in the grand, sometimes frightening, tapestry of life. Let the quiet of this moment settle around you, like soft dust motes dancing in a fading sunbeam. The need to understand, to find comfort, to connect with others through shared stories. That part of us hasn't really changed at all, has it? It just wears different clothes now. Breathe deep and let the whispers of the past lull you into a peaceful state. The night is calm, and you are safe here, in this quiet space we've shared. Whispered sleep well.